The sun was blinding that afternoon, reflecting off the empty stretch of land where our mansion once stood. The wind carried the faint scent of dust and cut grass, whispering through the silence that followed his scream. I watched from across the street, hands steady on the steering wheel, heart still. The man who'd promised me forever stood staring at nothing, just soil and air where his empire used to be. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that their betrayal nearly broke you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes the stories we survive are the ones that define us. That day wasn't about revenge. It was about closure, about reclaiming the pieces I thought I'd lost for good. And as I watched him crumble, I knew it was finally time to tell the truth. Let me show you how it all began. It was 2:30 p.m. when they pulled into the driveway. Him in his sharp suit, her still glowing from their honeymoon. They expected to see the grand white mansion standing proud against the sun. Instead, there was nothing. Just an empty lot, a stretch of grass where their dream home once stood. I sat quietly across the street in my car, windows cracked, the summer air drifting in. I watched his face twist in confusion, then in disbelief, then in rage. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said was already there, in that silence, in that emptiness. That house had once been mine. Every stone, every window, every memory. I had poured years into it, believing we were building a life together. Then one morning, he told me he was done, said he'd found someone younger, someone who made him feel alive again. He walked out of our 20-year marriage as if it were a meeting that had run too long. He left me with nothing but the echo of his betrayal and a signature on papers he barely read. He never realized that signature gave me everything. Watching him now, standing in that empty space where his empire used to be, I felt no guilt, only peace. There's a special kind of justice in seeing someone lose what they once took for granted. I didn't destroy his life out of hate. I simply took back what was already mine. And as he shouted into the quiet air, I smiled faintly, remembering how this all began. The first lie, the first sign I ignored, the moment I realized what kind of man he really was. That's where the story truly starts. Let me tell you how it all unfolded. The silence after he left was heavier than any argument we ever had. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It crawls into your chest and makes a home there. I'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore, realizing he'd already built a new life while I was still learning how to breathe in mine. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of loyalty, small compromises, shared meals, and fading affection. It didn't happen all at once. Love eroded slowly, like water against stone. By the time he told me he'd met someone new, I wasn't even surprised, just hollow. She was young, bright, full of the kind of admiration he'd long stopped earning. He told me she made him feel alive, as if I'd been the one killing him all these years. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just nodded, signed what he wanted me to sign, and watched him walk away with a smile that wasn't for me. The worst part wasn't losing him. It was losing my children. They called less. They visited him more. Maybe it was easier to believe his version of the story, the one where I was bitter and ungrateful, the one where he was the victim of an unhappy marriage. I stopped trying to defend myself. There's no winning sympathy when people have already chosen their sides. But pain changes you. It sharpens you. In those quiet weeks, I started to see things I hadn't before. The patterns, the papers, the signatures he'd never really paid attention to. While he spent his life chasing approval, I'd been the one quietly managing everything that made it possible. That's when I realized I wasn't powerless. I wasn't abandoned. I was prepared, even if I didn't know it yet. I had something he didn't understand, something he'd never think to look for. And that's where everything began to shift. The day I opened that drawer and saw what he'd left behind, that was the moment I stopped being the victim. That was the moment I remembered who I was. Betrayal has a way of sharpening your vision. Once the tears dry, the noise fades, and what's left is clarity, the kind that cuts through everything you thought you knew. That's what happened to me the morning I opened that drawer. Inside were folders he never cared to read. Deeds, transfers, signatures, years of paperwork he'd ignored while I quietly managed our finances. He'd always said I was good with details, that I should handle the boring stuff. So I did. I handled everything. Every property, every account, every business share. All of it was under my name. At first, I couldn't believe it. I sat at the kitchen table, pages spread out before me, sunlight pooling across the wood. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was realization, pure, cold, undeniable truth. The man who left me for someone half my age had walked away without reading the fine print. He'd given me everything. When I met with Janet Lewis, my lawyer, she looked at the documents and smiled in that quiet, knowing way only women who've seen too much can. She told me the power was already mine. I didn't need to fight for it. I just had to decide what kind of ending I wanted. That conversation changed everything. I stopped crying. I stopped replaying old memories, stopped asking why. My life became a series of plans, appointments, and signatures. I moved through each day with calm precision, making sure every piece was where it needed to be. No anger, no chaos, just intention. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd humiliated me and started over clean. But while he was busy showing off his new life, I was quietly building the finale of ours. It's funny how justice doesn't always come with noise or fury. Sometimes it comes in silence, in neatly filed paperwork and perfectly timed patience. When he comes home, he'll see it. The truth. The cost of underestimating the woman he once called his wife. And that moment, that's the part I've been waiting for. It was 2:30 p.m. when they pulled into the cul-de-sac. The afternoon light hung low, soft and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look almost forgiving. I sat in my car across the street, engine off, windows cracked just enough to hear the faint hum of tires on asphalt. Their laughter carried faintly through the air. Carefree, certain, unprepared. Mark stepped out first, jacket slung over his shoulder, sunglasses still on. Behind him came his new wife, radiant in a white sundress, her smile wide until she looked ahead. Then came the silence, the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from disbelief. Where the mansion once stood, the home I designed, the one I filled with every memory of my life. There was nothing, just grass, dust, and the faint outline where walls had been. The house was gone, completely gone. I watched as confusion turned to panic. Mark's head darted left and right, as if the house might reappear if he just looked hard enough. The woman clutched his arm, then stepped back. Her expression a mixture of fear and realization. Even from across the street, I could see the color drain from his face. It wasn't an accident. Every nail, every window, every marble tile had been sold, dismantled and erased, all done legally, every permit signed, every dollar accounted for. I'd sold the land to a developer, transferred ownership, and made sure the last trace of that house existed only in his memory. People think revenge is loud, that it comes with shouting and fire and chaos. But this was silence. Clean, complete, irreversible silence. Watching him stand in the emptiness he once called his kingdom, I felt something close to peace, not joy, not gloating, just a steady, quiet release. Still, even in victory, there was a sting, because behind every act of justice lies a wound that never fully heals. I'd loved that man once. I'd built a life around him. But love doesn't survive betrayal. It transforms. And mine had become purpose. As the wind lifted, carrying the sound of his distant shouts, I started my car. My reflection in the rearview mirror was calm, steady, and unrecognizable from the woman I used to be. Phase 1 was complete. What came next would strip away every illusion Mark ever built. It started slowly. Soft murmurs over coffee, curious looks at the country club, polite messages that went unanswered. At first, I didn't have to say a word. The truth has a way of walking on its own once it's been set free. One by one, people began to see Mark for who he really was. The image he'd built for years, of the successful husband, the devoted father, the charming businessman, cracked under the weight of reality. His colleagues stopped returning calls. His investors began to question the missing funds. Friends he used to brag to suddenly avoided his name. The woman he'd left me for finally learned what I already knew. That the luxury, the confidence, the endless promises were all borrowed time. His debts were deeper than either of us had realized, but his pride ran deeper still. I didn't spread rumors. I didn't twist the story. I simply released the documents, tax filings, loan statements, emails he thought I'd deleted, facts, evidence, every piece of proof he had once signed without reading. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same carelessness that built his empire was what dismantled it. Watching the fallout wasn't satisfying in the way I once imagined. It wasn't laughter or fireworks. It was quiet, almost solemn. I didn't feel joy when his business partners backed away, or when his new wife stopped wearing her ring. I just felt the stillness that comes when justice replaces anger. People started calling me brave, though that's not how it felt. It felt necessary. I had spent years shrinking to make room for his ego, his stories, his lies. Now, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of my own silence, because silence no longer meant weakness. It meant control. I didn't destroy his life. He did that himself. I just turned on the light so everyone could see the mess he'd made. When the noise finally faded, when the last apology arrived too late to matter, I felt something shift inside me. Power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that liberates. The kind that comes from truth standing on its own 2 feet. But the truth, as powerful as it is, only exposes the surface. Beneath it lies the foundation of everything he valued most. Money. And that's where the next battle would begin. When truth breaks the illusion, money becomes the next battlefield. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. The first cracks appeared in small ways: calls from the bank, messages left unanswered, meetings canceled without explanation. Then came the letters, formal, cold, and impossible to ignore. His accounts were frozen, his business loans recalled, his investments gone. Everything he had built on borrowed charm and overconfidence began to collapse, one signature at a time. I watched from a distance, not out of cruelty, but closure. The man who once prided himself on control now scrambled for stability. His new wife, the one he'd promised the world, found herself questioning everything, especially the silence that followed when the bills started piling up. I didn't need to lift a finger. The system he'd trusted to protect him was doing the work for me. Meanwhile, my life was quiet. I woke early, made coffee, and opened the curtains to soft morning light spilling across my small living room. My new home wasn't large, but it was mine. The furniture didn't match. The walls still smelled faintly of fresh paint, and yet it felt like peace. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone an explanation or an apology. I had secured what mattered long before the war began. The accounts, the deeds, the savings. Every asset he'd overlooked now served as the foundation of my independence. Not through deceit, but through foresight. I had signed my name where he never thought to look, and in doing so, I'd written my freedom long before he wrote his betrayal. Watching his empire crumble didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance, justice that arrived quietly, without applause. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The version of me that once waited for approval no longer existed. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a storm. The air feels lighter, even if the ground is still damp. That's what my life became. A calm after years of chaos. I didn't destroy him. I simply stepped out of the shadow he built and let the truth do what it always does: set things right. I had peace. I had freedom. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Mornings are quiet now. I wake before the sun, when the sky is pale and the air feels untouched. I make coffee, open the window, and listen to the world breathe. The hum of traffic in the distance, the rustle of leaves outside my door. None of it demands anything from me. For the first time in years, my life feels like my own. The silence used to scare me. It felt like proof of everything I'd lost. But over time, it became something else. Space. Space to think, to feel, to remember who I was before I started shrinking to fit someone else's story. I've learned that love, at its best, should never require you to disappear. Trust should not silence you. And pain, when faced instead of feared, can become the teacher you never asked for, but desperately needed. Betrayal broke something in me, but it also cleared away the illusions I built around it. What was left was truth. I once believed revenge would free me, that seeing him fall would somehow rebuild me. But it didn't. Justice brought balance, yes, but it was self-respect that brought peace. Standing on my own 2 feet, paying my own bills, waking up without waiting for approval. That's what freedom feels like. Quiet, simple, steady. I don't carry anger anymore. I thought forgiveness meant letting him off the hook, But I've learned it's really about letting go of the weight he left behind. I forgive, not because he deserves it, but because I deserve peace more than I deserve pain. Some nights, I still think about the woman I was back then, nervous, uncertain, afraid of being alone. I wish I could tell her that she survives, that she finds joy again in the smallest things: sunlight on the counter, laughter over dinner, music playing softly in the background. If you've been broken, I hope you remember this. Your strength is not born from what you lost, but from what you rebuilt. Healing is slow, but it's real, and it begins the moment you stop fighting the past and start trusting the person you're becoming. My story isn't about revenge. It's about renewal, and if it speaks to you, share it. Someone else might need to know that peace is possible. When I look back now, it feels like a lifetime ago. The chaos, the anger, the silence that followed. It all feels softer, like a storm remembered after the skies have cleared. I used to think my story was about betrayal, about loss and revenge. But now I see it was really about rediscovery. It was about learning who I was when everything I depended on disappeared. Pain has a strange way of stripping life down to what's real. When the noise fades, you're left with yourself, your thoughts, your choices, your truth. That's when you realize strength doesn't come from winning battles. It comes from standing up when no one's watching. It's not about revenge or proving someone wrong. It's about choosing peace when chaos tries to pull you back in. I learned that independence isn't just financial or physical. It's emotional. It's the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you're whole, even if someone once made you feel broken. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about releasing the power it has over you. When I let go of the need to hurt back, I finally felt free. Mark's betrayal changed my life, but it also revealed parts of me I'd buried under years of compromise and fear. I discovered a resilience I didn't know I had, and a peace that comes only when you stop fighting the past. I don't hate him anymore. In some strange way, I thank him, because without the collapse, I never would have rebuilt myself the way I was meant to be. If you're listening and you've been through something that broke you, please know this: your pain doesn't define you. What you do with it does. You have the power to heal, to rise, to begin again. No matter how impossible it feels right now. Healing isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the sound of you breathing again, believing again, living again. So tell me, have you ever faced something like this? Have you found your way back from betrayal or loss? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone, and maybe, together, we'll remind someone out there that peace is possible.